I worked a graveyard shift at work, and when I come home, my wife leaves for work. I am typically exhausted and mildly sleep deprived. My adventure happened mid-morning, before my son and I's nap time. I also only get 3 to 4 hours of actual sleep in the evening before my shift. I believe this detail can help this community come to a conclusion. I'm also going to make a separate post with photos of the trail, a picture of my son and I with the wagon, the map of the trail, and an approximate area where the anomaly was observed. I'm an Armed Forces veteran, USA, on the East Coast. My son is only 2 years old, and this event happened about 1 week ago. Every now and then, I like to take my son out on walks around the neighborhood in his wagon. We would typically travel to one of the nearby playgrounds so that he can blow off some energy before his afternoon nap. I live in a decent area that has a newly developed houses and townhomes, and the housing development is still expanding greatly. This particular day was beautiful. Lightly cloudy, somewhat hot, but with a frequent cool down due to passing clouds. I thought that today would be a great day to take my son out for a stroll and head over to a newly made playground that I saw on the way home one day. So we set off, packed with a couple of water bottles and a snack just in case. As we were doing a brief tour around the neighborhood, I noticed the state-sponsored and well-maintained trail entrance that I had never noticed while driving around here. I decided, screw it, it's a pretty nice day, my son likes nature, he won't mind. So off we went on this very distinctive clear trail with mile markers every quarter mile and yellow markers on trees every 100 feet or so to let you know that you were on the correct path. Everything was going well for the first mile and a quarter. We were fairly deep in the woods, but certainly no more than a quarter mile from the developments at any given time. We came across a bridge that went over a small trench and proceeded for about another half mile after that. Then things slowly started to seem off. The clear yellow markers that were put on the trees started disappearing, probably due to vandalism because the nail was still there, but the marker itself was completely gone. I didn't mind much, because the path was still definitive, deliberate, and well maintained. But then I heard a loud snapping sound that sounded like it was roughly 50 to 75 feet back. I immediately halted the wagon and looked back to see what it was. This is where things got surreal. As I looked back, I noticed that the trail I was walking on lost all sense of familiarity. There were trees I didn't see, certain plants I know for sure went through it before, stuff like that. But regardless, I kept my composure and stared deeply into the woods to see what made that snapping sound. I scanned the area and didn't see any life forms, but for some reason, my eyes started to fixate on a particularly unnerving dark section of the forest. For whatever reason, my body started locking up, and every single alarm bell in my head was pinging. No matter how hard I tried to focus on this dark patch, I couldn't see anything. I had the weirdest sensation of being able to see each individual branch and plants in high detail, but I couldn't focus on the scene overall. It was super blurry. I also felt my internal fight-or-flight mechanism flipping between the two decisions faster than a coin and a coin toss. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to figure out why my senses were not working anymore. This instinctual part of my brain was screaming that there was something there, but I absolutely could not observe it. Whatever little light was in that area seemed to bend around this one central point, somewhat like how a cloaking device works. It was a minor distortion, but enough to make it strangely obvious. I then noticed how I hadn't heard a peep from the forest this entire time, and I was feeling very cold even during an 85+ degree weather. I could not shake this feeling of impending doom, probably what one feels when they're on the verge of death. I felt exceptionally vulnerable because I was not armed and had no way of dealing with whatever the hell this was. Eventually, I was able to snap out of my trance briefly to look down at my son, and saw that his body was contorted around his seat, frozen and staring exactly where the anomaly was, with his mouth agape and his eyes wide and dilated. This is when I knew I wasn't hallucinating and that we needed to get the hell out of there. I took advantage of my brief moment of clarity and ran like the wind with my son in tow. I looked back only once and saw that my boy was still looking towards the area, but not frozen in place anymore. It took all about a couple minutes to get out past the tree line onto a main road. For whatever reason, I broke down and started crying. My son looked at me like I was crazy. I never felt such sheer terror over what seemed like nothing in my whole life. I hadn't felt that way at all at any point in my life, in fact. The feeling that my son and I are completely vulnerable, and that I wouldn't have been able to defend either of us. I also never had that distinct feeling of being able to see things perfectly, yet not able to register any of it in my head. My morbid curiosity wants me to revisit the place, to quit with a firearm and a GoPro to record any events that would arise, but I'm still trying to get over the previous experience for now. I've been in crazy situations before, but this trumps anything I have ever experienced. I'm a 15-year-old male, and I've got a pretty interesting predicament. So around a year back, I'm camping with my Boy Scout troop. We were going to this thing called the Voyager Outpost, which is a one-night camp during the camp we are already at. We leave main camp and canoe 2 miles to the backside, where they dump us on an island, give us food to cook, and leave. We'd also have to build our own shelter. Seeing as it was July, the weather was amazing. Me and my buddies all had our shelters between 3 trees. Our shelters were hammocks with rope over the top, on which a reflective blanket would hang draped. Super comfy. Anyways, around 2 a.m., we heard a noise. It was more like a grunting. This quickly got louder, until it was a deafening and loud growl. It was kind of like a black bear. But black bears don't live in our woods. No bears do, actually. We were on an island. The next morning, my 2 friends and I wake up. How we slept once walked away, I'm not sure. Around 6 a.m., we all have this exact same story, at the exact same time frame. We were all wearing watches, so we could easily tell what time it was. Seeing as how it was the exact same story, in the exact same time, and it was only us on the island, which was 100 square feet if that, we figured it must be somewhere in the surrounding woods. We looked around the island, first, only to find an owl feather next to a hawk feather. Owls are messengers of death, and when reached by a witch doctor, Inuit I believe up north near Canada, I was told I was a hawk. At this point, I'm kinda creeped out. We looked in the water, and there was nothing, no prints, and nothing that looked out of the ordinary. We were surrounded by dense brush on the perimeter of the island, so it would have had to step over the brush if it had feet, making its initial print in the sandy pretty deep. But there was nothing. We get in our canoes and paddle around the island, looking for something, anything, but we just couldn't find anything. Flash forward to yesterday, and I'm camping, just a weekender. I go by the stream to relax and stuff. There's a dead hawk. Fresh, no marks, no bullets, no holes. Just dead. Last night, an owl flew over my tent as I walked out to take a pee. I decided to hold it. Does anyone have a plausible answer as to what's going on? Am I doomed, or did I piss something off? Some answers would be greatly appreciated. I was probably 8 or so, and my church would always do a family camp. Basically, you have 20 or so families all camping out in the woods at the same time. It was always the highlight of my summers. This particular year, though, there had been an abundance of bear sightings where we usually went camping. Apparently, they had become more courageous and started wandering into camps regularly, so they needed to be relocated. In order to do this, they had to set up very large traps. The one nearest us was massive and was in a small clearing near the bathrooms. Inside was a dead deer hanging upside down. It always struck me as odd that they would have this in the middle of a campsite, and for the longest time, I thought my friends and I must have imagined it. Years later, though, Someone who was an adult at the time confirmed the events. My friends and I all stayed in one tent together, and in the middle of the night we all woke up to a clanging sound. It sounded like something was clashing against the trap. After a small amount of clanging, it was completely quiet. We figured the trap must have snapped shut and caught the bear. A few hours later, I really needed to use the bathroom, and no scary bear in a trap was going to keep me from doing so. I pulled open the zipper and headed to the bathroom, but the trap caught my eye on the way. I was just starting to get light out, and I could clearly see that there was nothing in the trap. The deer had been taken out and the trap hadn't shut. Later, we looked at the trap from a distance and saw no footprints or nothing to indicate that a deer would have been dragged out by an animal. To this day, I still can't figure out what happened. Maybe it was a trap malfunction, or maybe it was something else that was smarter than a trap. I have a friend that's very big into squatching. That being said, I was very surprised at how level-headed and objective the guy was. Made it clear to me that this group had actually gathered a lot of very interesting evidence. He also explained that the Bigfoot community was full of fraudsters and they were the cause of the most ridicule associated with the subject. So he refers me to a few documentaries to watch, and after a few beers and some more research, I was hooked. I phoned him the next day and asked him when they were going squatching next. I was delighted when he informed me that I was welcome to join them that weekend, and he gave me a list of camping gear I would need. Now, likely, as anybody else would, I love the camp and hunt. I was just out for a good time. I wasn't taking this too seriously. Did I expect to see a Bigfoot? No, not really. Did I see a Bigfoot? No. But did we have a very good, interesting time and some unexpected experiences that I have difficulty explaining? Yes. The first was where my friend tried some wood knocking. This apparently was a way that the Bigfoot, should I call them big feet, communicate. It simply consists of knocking a bat or a board against a tree. So he walks up to a nice tall oak, takes a board, and proceeds to start whacking the shit out of it rhythmically. At this point, he looks like a total jackass, and I'm starting to feel like a jackass just watching him. Then he pauses, and I hear it. Whack, whack, whack. Off in the distance, same as he did. I almost shat a cinder block. Someone or something was responding to him. The fucking squatchers all just smile and said, "It's good. Sounds like they're still in the area." Good. Bigfoot being less than a mile away from you is good? I had not believed in Bigfoot at any level up until this point, but the forest was starting to look a lot creepier now than it sort of did before. I thought about the prospect of an 8-foot-tall hairy North American wood ape carrying me off into the trees for some sweet monkey love and cringed. According to my new buddy, who I am starting to doubt the sanity of, Bigfoot is mostly harmless. They have been attacks, he says, but mostly they give you a lot of warning and would rather not be seen. I asked him how they warn people and he says, "You'll see, we're gonna get him nice and riled up tonight." Oh great, I'm literally messing with Sasquatch, except there's no beef jerky. It's cold as fuck, and I'm armed with nothing but a machete. I'm actually starting to get a little scared. I was already prairie dogging from the wood knocking exchange, and now I knew that something was just beginning. So the night goes on happily enough. Someone brought some ballpark franks and we cooked on the campfire. Kumbaya, my lord, kumbaya, etc. Shit got real at around 1 a.m. My friend tells me more of the ways to antagonize Bigfoot. He said one of those ways is to play recorded tapes of pigs being slaughtered at the ridiculous volume. Hey, if it worked on Mick Jagger, why not Sasquatch? So he goes on ahead and starts blasting the most blood-curdling shit I've ever heard out of a megaphone. If you've played this shit while I was trying to sleep, I certainly wouldn't like you. And to my utter amazement, first one, then two, and then a lot of rocks started pelting us from the tree line. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, it's just rocks, don't be such a pussy. These were big fucking rocks. And I was even more scared when I realized that whoever was throwing these rocks had been standing at the tree line watching us. So under a hail of thrown rocks, we pick up our gear and move camp quickly. My friend informs me that we are completely safe, and I promptly disagree. I felt safer in Somalia. At least, there I had a gun and semi-sane people to get my back. He goes on to inform me, now that we have moved camp out of their territory, they will likely disperse. But I guess he knew his stuff because the rest of the night was pretty uneventful. And I didn't sleep for obvious reasons. Now, did I see Bigfoot? No. I tried to look into the trees. I even put my flashlight on the tree line. This caused me to become more of a target for the rocks being thrown and couldn't make out anything but dark shapes. They did look big, but nonetheless, they could have been pranksters. So I didn't have an encounter with North America's wood ape. And maybe I just had some kind of encounter with pranksters. But nonetheless, I won't be squatching anytime soon, because those events alone were enough to creep me right the hell out. I've never told this story to anyone before, simply to never having an answer, and thinking there's nothing that can be done. Many, many years ago, at Wongai Campground in Queensland, Australia, my father, my friend, and I were out camping for a couple of days. Usually it's packed, but we went during the week and got 2 days off school. I can't remember the reason. I think it was just because my dad had a few days off, but that's beside the point. Due to it being midweek, the grounds were empty. We've been here many times before, but never alone. However, we were excited due to having the whole grounds to ourselves, which was pretty cool. Now, we were no strangers to the Australian bush. We know what to look out for, we know how to play it safe. So at night, knowing no one was around to mess with our camp, we decided to go for a mini bushwalk to walk to the other side of the river that runs along the grounds. When I say grounds, it's just a clearing in the middle of a bush, not a properly established grounds, far away from all the roads. We got to the campsite on the opposite side of the river, and looking out the river, we could see a bright light just near our campgrounds. Thinking it could be the fire, we thought we put it out by that time, but we weren't sure, so we walked back through the bush to go to our site, still able to see the large lightning. However, we were going to our side, and we realized that it was not a fire. As we were able to come closer to the river this time, we saw that the light was over the river, not in it, but over it. We were somewhat scared, but thought there was some explanation for it. Maybe a torch, or something along those lines. But looking for wherever we were, there was nothing under it. The light was a good 70 centimeters above the water, and still, dead still. The light itself was flickering, sort of like a fire, but it was in no way attached to anything. Just a large, between a tennis ball and soccer ball size, ball floating, giving off a strong, fire-like light, but more like a light bulb center. This went on for maybe 30 minutes as we tried splashing the water and trying to figure out what it was, but it didn't move and didn't do anything. It just floated in that one spot, in complete silence, unlike the sound a fire would make. My dad decided to get a torch and his camera, and of course, being the scared 12-year-olds we were, we went with him. As soon as we go to the camp, which was only maybe 100 meters away, the light was gone. We ran back with a torch and nothing was there. No one there and no other campers, just gone. We didn't really talk about it because we didn't really know what it was, how, or why. Lights are something that's very popular in the Australian outback, and that's the only explanation that I can think for. But they have no explanation, so it's kind of a dead-end story. When I was 15, my brother, 2 of our cousins, and I used to spend a week up north with my grandparents on a piece of land in Wisconsin that they bought. To set the scene, the land was about 5 acres in a rural part of the state, and the neighbors around us were summer people who only came up on weekends, meaning midweek was pretty desolate. My grandparents had 2 RV trailers on their land, one for their use and one for guest use. At 15, my parents decided to let my cousin, 13, and I use the guest RV just because they thought we were old enough to be by ourselves. They kept my brother, 11, and my younger cousin, 10, in their trailer. I had just returned from a week in Washington, D.C. with friends, so most of our nighttime rituals included gossiping about D.C. and the boy I had a crush on, who was there as well. Nothing concerning happened for the first few nights. As a precaution, my grandparents gave us a car key and an intercom just in case we got scared. Oh boy, how didn't I know that this would be used in one of our last nights there? It was around 10 p.m. and my grandparents and the others had gone to sleep, so we walked over to the other trailer. As we got in the trailer, we started to change when something in my head popped up. We hadn't locked the door. The voice in my head urged me to lock it. We had admittedly been bad about this. I went back and locked it, and my cousin and I went back to talking at the table. As my cousin talked about the boy she liked, I got this feeling of dread. I noticed that I stopped listening to her, and after a minute, she did too. She asked me what was wrong, and I shushed her. Outside the window next to us, the shades were closed. We heard a shuffling noise, as if someone was walking back and forth in front of the window. This went on for a solid 5 minutes. The noise approached the door, and I immediately hit the intercom button calling my grandpa. I told him that there were weird noises outside. Whoever was outside could most likely there be hearing us talk because of the thin walls. We could still hear the shuffling. My grandpa's voice rang out of the intercom. I'm grabbing my gun, I'll be right there. At that second, the shuffling stopped. I hear my grandpa rip open the door of his trailer and he yelled out. He ran to our door and knocked, telling me it was him. I opened the door, and to this day, I have never seen the look of a crazed and terrified as my grandpa's face. He was holding his gun and he asked us to follow him to his camper. We obliged and grabbed the stuff we needed. My brother and cousin and grandma were sitting up in the camper. My grandma looked terrified. She sat in the window staring out past us. We settled in and slept, but she sat there awake all night. The next day, we left 2 days early for home. My grandparents to this day tell us it was probably an animal and shush us up about the story. I'm 22, so it's been a while. I know it was a person. So does my cousin. But if I could go back, I would have ripped open those blinds so I could have made sure and not have to live with the wonder of who was on the other side. I was on a field trip to our local park. Our teacher decided to let us go on one of the trails. This trail had a larger trail and had a smaller trail inside its loop. The smaller trail had a slimy, stinky pond inside of it. The small trail was on a circular area surrounding the pond, but the pond had an area that went under a little bridge walkway. On one side of the bridge was the pond, on the other side was a flowing tiny creek. My friend and I decided just to take the small trail and stop at the bridge and wait, and then go back to the bus, because we didn't really feel like walking that day. So that is what we did. I remember it being shaded by the trees except for the little bridge. So my friend laid down on the bridge in the only sunny spot, facing the larger trail. You could see the smaller trail from the larger trail. I thought I saw a crawdad. I loved those things and decided I was going to go into the little creek and grab it. I remember thinking that it was convenient that there were stone steps down into the creek. I walked down them and thought nothing of it. I remember standing in the creek and looking down in it. I remember saying to my friend along the lines of something that doesn't look right in this creek. Look at it, it just seems to go on for a long time, but it shouldn't. I mean, it should end at the parking lot, but the parking lot was in front of the trail right outside the tree line. I remember nothing else. Nothing. At some point my shoe was untied and I stooped down to tie it, and my stomach growled. I said to my friend, we need to get back. I stepped up the rocks, the creek, and onto the bridge. My friend said, yeah. I remember me being afraid. I was like, it was feeling spooky here. It seems so late, let's go and hurry. She agreed. We got up and we ran towards the entrance. Our teacher, our classmate, and our buses were gone. But the cops, the firemen, and the principal and our parents were all there. They were getting ready to drag the pond. We had been gone for around 4 hours. Numerous people walked both trails and walked over that little bridge, they said. They were mad because they said we could not have been where we said we were. And they were mad because they thought we were hiding and not coming when they screamed our names. But we weren't lying. My friend and I became distant. We've never talked about it since, not even once. This happened about 4 years ago, when I was 19. I was allowed by my parents to take over managing a little house we had in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, which we used to rent out to people throughout the year. There was a manager's house about 3 kilometers away, where I lived during this time. Originally, my father and I would meet the tenants, and then come stay in the manager's house for the first week, and then 2 days out of every month that followed to make sure that everything was okay. As I was a teenage girl, my parents were a little hesitant to start letting me take over by myself. But Dad got in an accident and Mom had to take care of him, so they stayed home while I managed the manager's house full time, as I wanted to move out of home finally. The first 2 lots of people who rented the house under my supervision were great. There was a family of 4 who stayed in March through June, and then a young lesbian couple who stayed August through November. After 2 such successful tenants, my parents and I had pretty much calmed down, and we stopped worrying that one day I'd meet some creeps who would murder me or would use the house as a drug den or something. It was just my guard thoroughly dropped that I arranged for a couple to stay for the month of December. We spoke via email, and they seemed pretty normal. Joe and Laura, husband and wife in their late 40s, who were looking to rent for a month to see if the country life was for them. So after 2 weeks of emailing, the day comes that I'm meeting them in person, at the house that they'll be renting for the next few weeks. When their car pulled up, Joe flashed me a smile through the windshield and jumped out of the car to shake my hand while Laura went to the boot of the car for something. Joe was probably only 2 inches taller than me, a bit of a belly, thinning hair, and smelt like cloves. All in all, not threatening in the least. His face was surprisingly unlined, which made him look a lot younger than he was, but also vaguely disturbing. No crow's feet or laugh lines, as though he had never smiled to have enough etched into them. If you go into the internet, you can find articles about women who hasn't smiled in 40 years. It was reading an article about that which reminded me of this story. It made me decide to share it as a matter of fact. It gives her an appearance, which makes her look a lot younger. It's though your brain is saying that there's something not quite right about this person with no lines on their face. Sitting there talking to Joe was the single most horrifically uncomfortable experience of my life. It's often said that if you meet a true psychopath, you'll know it, but then you'll ignore the feeling and soon forget about it. The most common theory that I've heard, at least, is that they don't give out the unconscious signals that everyone else does when interacting with people, and that your mind picks up on this lack of tips and tips you off about them being kind of off. Then, of course, the psychopath will be as charming as they always are, and you'll feel like you were being silly and push the feeling away. The second Joe approached me, my whole body went on high alert. He made a "do you take card" joke before handing me the cash for the month. He said a lot of very complimentary things about the house and the bush around us. But the whole time, I could just not shake that feeling that there was something very, very wrong about him. Laura came over and introduced herself, and the feeling just got worse, to the point to where instead of offering to make them some tea and show them around the property, I just handed over the keys and told them to call if they needed anything. Joe gave me another smile as he said goodbye, but I noticed that it didn't even reach his eyes. I almost threw up on the spot. I never told my parents about how much they scared me, but I did tell some friends, so they'd know who to blame if I got murdered one night. Joe and Laura never contacted me throughout the rest of the month. I spent those weeks double-checking every door and window before going to bed, and several times convinced friends to stay with me because I was too afraid that Joe and Laura would come for me in the night, even though they had never been at all threatening. The day after they were meant to leave, I bought 3 male, very tough friends with me to check the house. The keys were left on the kitchen table, along with a short note thanking me for the privacy I gave them and an extra $100. On our website, they left a short but positive review about the house and made a special mention of the beautiful and helpful manager. whose attitude and care made the whole experience that much more unforgettable. We'll be thinking of you often, dear, which I promptly deleted before getting incredibly drunk and crying about it. To Joe and Laura, thank you for the extra $100, but for the love of all that is holy, please don't ever try to contact me again. This isn't my story, but it's my father's. My dad has only told this story very few times and has refused to tell the story again. Now, just to elaborate, my dad is a very black and white person and does not believe in anything spiritual paranormal. And because of this story creeps me out because I know my dad is not the kind of person to lie about these types of things. He does not know to this day what exactly happened in the Australian outback on a night that scared the life out of him. Now, the place where my dad used to mine was practically a desert. A few straggly trees, shrubs, and red dirt. What you would describe it as a typical Australian outback. In the early 1900s, people would build shacks out in this outback, primarily to be close to the mine sites located there. The very few of these shacks that still remain are run down and almost non-existent. Roofs are missing, walls torn down, etc. When my dad was a miner, he was good friends with many Aboriginal elders who were strong believers in the spiritual world. It was on the brink of night when my dad would be driving back from a mine site with an elder. They were also miners. They would pass one of these ruined shacks and apparently it would be lit up like someone had installed a working light bulb. There were no other people or cars or any other type of close civilization. The elder would tell my dad very sternly to keep driving and do not make any notice of the shack, and to never stop and investigate. According to the elder, these shacks were full of bad spirits. Now, this is the story that creeps me out, and the one that my dad will never tell again. My dad would be out on one of these mine sites for days and sometimes weeks. Himself and his two mates had all put down for a caravan that they used to sleep in each night on the mines. This caravan had an attached trailer to carry their tools, eskies, etc. One night, whilst traveling between mines, the three men decided to set up camp next to one of these shacks. Nothing unusual happened while they set up for the night and ate dinner around the fire. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning where things began to become scary. The three men all woke up at the same time to a blood-curdling scream of two women coming from the shack. My dad described the scream as no other, one of pure terror and evil. Startled, all the men jumped up and looked out at the caravan window to see this terrifying sight. The trailer that was once attached to their caravan was spinning on the spot. Keep in mind that for a two-wheel trailer to spin on its back is nearly impossible. The screaming continued, and the three men, all terrified, sped off into the night, not looking back. My dad says they drove silent and scared out of their wits for about an hour before stopping and hesitantly going back to sleep. In the morning, my dad said that there were no visible handprints on the caravan window, and there was nothing else that they could find. They all looked on the dirt below the window, and there were no prints of shoes or feet. It gave the impression as someone was pressed up against the window and looking in. It wasn't until they arrived back at the local pub that they spoke of their ordeal that occurred that night. They mentioned what had happened to the locals and the location of where they had set up camp. The locals all knew the shack they were talking of, exclaiming that apparently in the early 1900s, two Aboriginal women had been raped and murdered in that said shack. Bad and corrupted spirits were only left remaining. A couple of weeks later, my dad and his two mates returned to the shack to reclaim their trailer. Although it had disappeared into thin air or had been stolen, they decided that the best thing to do was burn down the shack in high hopes the spirits would disappear. My dad has only repeated the story a few times and now refuses to ever say it again. I think that night was the only few that my dad actually was scared out of his wits, and he cannot have reasonable explanation to what happened that night. So I spent most of my summers in Australia, helping out at my uncle's farm. In the family, it's just him, my female cousin, who's never home because of ballet school, and the male cousin. My brother and I were there last summer when I was 14. I got up in the morning and walked into the kitchen, seeing a dude underneath the computer desk. He just fixing the computer, he'll only be in an hour. My uncle told me. My brother and my cousin went surfing while my uncle went to pick up something from the store. I get weird vibes from this bloke I've just been left alone with. We're in the middle of nowhere and I can't really ask for help too much. He looks kind of like the guy from Smash Mouth, but with a patchier beard and thinner hair. He keeps tinkering away at the computer, and I slink down the hall, because I want my privacy. I open my female cousin's bedroom door and walk in. For her music on softly and leave silently after I slam the door. I then crept down the hall a little more, into my male cousin's room, and then roll under his bed. An amazing feat, but then again I'm a twig, and just start messaging back and forth with my boyfriend back home. I let my boyfriend know what's happening. I laugh it off because I'm inherently suspicious of any man or woman I don't know. We were making jokes about him flying down here and beating up the repairman, but then I hear footsteps down the hall. The bathroom is right next to the computer room, and the only thing down here is the bedrooms. What did he want from here? I hear my female cousin's door open and he goes inside. Since she has laminate, I can hear him walking around. Her bathroom door creaks and I hear him pull it open and leave the room. He was definitely looking for something or someone. My cousin's door creaks open and he steps inside the room that I'm currently hiding in. Thankfully, my cousin has a lot of shit under his bed, so I wasn't found. This dude is muttering to himself as he opens the bathroom, the closet, then leaves again, walking around the house. I'm freaked out at this point, but it gets way worse. Our carpool is out, in front. It doesn't have any familiar sound to my uncle's truck. A phone rings and the dude picks up. No, I can't find her. I think she left or something. There's a pause and I fiercely message my boyfriend, thoroughly and utterly spooked. Fine, but they're gonna be back any minute. Move fast. I can't believe this is happening. People entering the house. I couldn't tell how many footsteps, but I later learned it was 2 sets. I stupidly roll out from under the bed so I can grab the phone in my cousin's nightstand. I couldn't use mine because it's Canadian phone, and fuck those Roman charges. I'm about to dial 911. Then, I get that moment of, oh fuck, I'm in a different country, what's the number for 911 here? So basically, I'm holding this pizza-shaped phone, going shit, when 3 dudes walk into the room. More repairmen, I ask them, trying very hard to play dumb. Right now, my boyfriend is messaging me like a madman because I sent him, call 911. I'm holding a phone and look very pale and shaky, which isn't good because I know what they're up to. They just fall into the room and I have never been more glad to hear, "What the fuck are you doing?" So my brother walks in, soaking wet, holding a surfboard, looking very menacing, and these dudes are cornered. They start making excuses, and by the time their sorry asses are done trying to explain why they've trapped a very scared-looking teenage girl in a bedroom, my overprotective uncle shows up, holding a bag of milk and some frozen curly fries. He flips shit. Much beating ensues. Long story short, I almost got terrorized by 3 older men, and they ended up looking like a child with purple and red crayons, got bored and drew all over them by my uncle.